Hello, hello, and welcome once again to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today on this fine Monday afternoon by two of my colleagues, Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you this week?
I'm not too bad in yourself, Nicholas.
I am pretty good. Pretty good. And Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you?
I'm okay.
Very good. Right. So we are into another exciting week, as I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. El Presidente himself, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, will be speaking to us tonight, and I suspect that booze will be unbanned. But over the weekend, there was not much news, but there was an interesting story, and this is about protests on beaches across the country over the weekend. So police in Cape Town have said they're continuing to monitor beaches after a protest of several hundred people was held on Saturday, protesting against level 3 lockdown, specifically that the beaches were closed as a measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Police said they issued a warning to residents at Muizenberg Beach that public order police officials peacefully removed the crowd from that area. No arrests were made. The City of Cape Town said that while it supported the demonstrations, it called on residents to be mindful of regulations. Community Services and Health MMC, Zayed Badri, said, "We support our residents for our beaches to be open. The mayor has already written to various government officials to repeal the regulations." One of the beach protest organizers, Clay Wilson, said that they would continue to visit beaches this week if the ban was not repealed. He said there would be another picket in Fishhook in the coming days. However, the EFF and the ANC are very upset about this. The EFF says, quote, "The police must do their jobs. In fact, the people who failed to arrest those people must be taken to task, and the people who broke the rules must also be arrested." And the ANC and spokesperson of the ANC said, "The National Command Council actually needs to investigate these protests, but in particular the response of the provincial government as well as the City of Cape Town." So the real problem here is the protesters and the DA government. Is that correct, Marius?
Yeah, that seems to be pretty much the sum of it. But for me, there were two interesting things after these beach protests. The first one was that these protesters. I watched two interviews, and both the people who spoke kind of they undermined the purpose of the protest. One lady, a lady called Chabad de la Fontaine, claimed that she's not only a medical doctor but also a quantum physicist, and she was saying all this really bizarre stuff about COVID-19 and how actually the bacteria in your gut actually fights it and all this kinds of strange stuff, which I mean makes you think, are these people normal or are they a bit crazy? And then there was another lady who said they want the beaches open, but just for the residents, not for the masses. And I actually couldn't watch any more of the interview because we all know what somebody means by masses. And I'm afraid if you want the beaches open, then that means that's open for everybody, not just a select few. This isn't the 1970s, 1980s where people can't go to the beach if they want. So there were those are two things that made me raise my eyebrows a bit. But I do think the beach protest overall, I think, was valid. But because we live in South Africa, this obviously came down to race. There were a couple of journalists and other people on social media saying you could see, these high levels of white privilege because the police actually treated the protesters like police in a civilized country should treat protesters or peaceful protesters, by talking to them and asking them to leave the area, not using water cannons or stun grenades or baton charges. And they're comparing it to the disgraceful scenes we saw a week or two ago where there were water cannons used on poor people queuing for SASSA grants and saying, this is proof of white privilege and so on. But I'm not too sure what these people expected. Did they want the police to actually attack? Did they want more police brutality against peaceful protesters? What we should have been saying is, yes, what the police did to these protesters in Muizenberg on Saturday is actually correct. That is how you should treat peaceful protesters, not with water cannons and stun grenades and what have you. And also the claim that, it's a white privilege thing. I think there's two issues there. So there was definitely a mixed race group at the beach on Saturday from the images I saw on social media. And last year there was a protest by restaurant owners and restaurant employees in the center of Cape Town, where there was water cannons used against those people. And from what I could see, the large maybe even a majority of those protests that time were white. So I think to say, being white protects you from the worst excesses of the South African state, I think is incorrect. But I think But I agree with the beach protests on Saturday, and I think we need more of it. So people will follow sensible rules, but they will push back against silly rules like the beach ban.
Right. And we've seen a lot of heavy-handedness from the police leading up to this. So I'm actually surprised that they didn't use, I don't know, baton charges or something, because I remember that famous picture that went around on social media of, I think it was either a very heavily armed policeman or a soldier on the beach, to enforce social distancing, which is really.
And there was a little kid looking up at him, and he had his then they had their gun and look the whole tactical outfits and stuff on.
Right, looking like he's about to raid a drug den.
Yeah.
Anyway, Ramaphosa is speaking to us tonight. So some of the people listening to this podcast may already know what he's going to say. But Terence, show us that you're an oracle, and do you think he's going to open the beaches and unban alcohol?
It's possible. It does seem that the number of infections are on the way down, so that gives some leeway. However, I think that the enabling condition, the disaster mentality, remaining at some level of lockdown, I think that is still going to be with us for a long time to come. I do think we'll be able to see some sort of movement, but we're not out of the woods yet in any by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting part of this. Is there sort of a fear now that, I mean, a lot of the kind of the kind of consensus opinion, I guess, amongst a lot of the health specialists and stuff is saying that there'll be a third wave and maybe even more. So, I mean, are we, so far it looks like the plan has just been, we go into lockdown when it gets bad and then we go out of lockdown. Marius, do you think that's going to continue if there's a third wave?
Most probably, but more and more evidence seems to indicate that lockdowns don't work, or all they do is push out your peak for a couple of weeks. I mean, if the whole reason for lockdown is to get the hospitals ready, then I suppose we can, see why they would be used. But it's just not feasible to keep on locking down people. Apart from the economic damage it does, I just think people in general are going to start chafing at these regulations. We've already seen in a place like the Netherlands, which is, pretty stable and law-abiding society. We saw there was quite, scenes that you wouldn't expect in a, kind of a sleepy place like that, where people were they protest against lockdowns and so on. And I think people just, as I said, I don't think you can lock down people indefinitely. I mean, not that we've been locked down indefinitely, but you need to be able to plan, especially businesses. Yeah. Is booze going to be banned again this year? Will hotels not be able to be open, or whatever the case is? And but I mean, who knows? I mean, looks like we've got our first batch of vaccines on its way, so that's going to be mainly for healthcare workers. But who knows, with any luck, by some, I don't know, South Africa always seems to pull back from the brink at some point. So perhaps it'll happen now, and we actually manage to get a large proportion of the population vaccinated before the middle of the year, and maybe we can avoid this third wave, which, I mean, I'm not a epidemiologist or whatever, but it does seem that it's likely we're going to have one. I mean, we already had two. So unless we have, a large proportion of the population immune or vaccinated, we probably get a third one probably in the beginning of winter.
Right. There is some good news with regards to trying to understand where we are with regards to the virus. And that is that, as our colleague Gabriel Krauser reported recently, there is now a proper study being conducted, which is going to determine what percentage of South Africans have already been infected, which is actually going to be quite useful, I think, for sort of judging where we are, maybe how many people need to be vaccinated, maybe whether a third wave is very likely, and also the effects of this new variant, which of course we've seen seems to be reducing the effectiveness of vaccines across the board. I saw another vaccine has been released, which is the one from Johnson & Johnson. They say that in the US, their vaccine was 72% effective. In South America, it was 66% effective. And in South Africa, where, of course, we have the mutant strain, it's only 58% effective, which is a little bit troubling. And the implication for that is that we need to vaccinate many, many more people than we would otherwise have to in order to have real effectiveness from the vaccine. Terence, do you have any final thoughts on this topic before we kind of move on to the one that's making the headlines today?
Watch for winter, I think. I think that's going to be that's going to be the deciding factor, and I think that's kind of the race against time. But I do think that this has also shown us a sort of brave new world. I was actually watching something a couple of weeks ago about the origins of AIDS, and it seems that the very first cases that we're aware of seem to have emerged in the 50s or the 40s or 50s. There's a theory that that its origins lie in the First World War in Cameroon, but it seems to have remained contained very much in Central Africa, and even there it was flew very much below the radar. Until it started to appear in places like San Francisco and New York. Something like COVID spread exponentially more rapidly. Different world.
But I think it's also because the way you get COVID is very different from the way you get AIDS.
No, certainly. No, certainly, but the point is that remained that appears to remain contained within a particular geographical area. People travel much more; they have much more contact with one another. This is simply I think this points to an ongoing risk in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely correct. One of the other important things about the vaccination program is that we've seen now, as Gabriel and I talked about on Two Crickets and the Thorn Tree, our other podcast, the virus seems to be mutating kind of at a rate of maybe once every 8 months, becoming significantly different. That seems to be the kind of that's some of the evidence suggests that might be a pattern that could emerge. We don't know for sure yet. But the bottom line is that if you want to see effectiveness on the vaccine, you're going to have to roll it out very well and very quickly, because if you don't do that, you're just going to get more mutations, and these mutations will dodge the vaccine, and then you'll have to get a booster shot and start all over again, and that's a disaster. So it's actually not just the stakes are not just high for the South African government, because of course if they treat the vaccine rollout as they do almost everything else, we're just going to be stuck in an endless cycle of COVID waves. But the rest of the world is also a little bit of threat too, because if we develop some sort of extra super virus that can escape all the vaccines, then it doesn't really matter, how well we vaccinate our people in the long run. We're going to spread it to the rest of the world, which is very dangerous. Any final thoughts, Marius, before we move on?
Yeah, I think that's a point. If every single country in the world gets vaccinated, and say, just for argument's sake, South Africa doesn't, that's the thing. The whole world has to get vaccinated if we actually want to beat this thing. So, I mean, for example, New Zealand, they've managed to basically get rid of COVID, but without effective vaccine, they're basically going to have to keep their borders closed indefinitely, which is also not feasible. So, I think, the vaccine. This is probably one of the biggest efforts in human history, and I think we can, if you're a human being, you can be quite proud of this collective effort. But I think I think it needs to work. Otherwise, we are going to have these unending COVID waves going in the future, probably.
Yeah. Anyway, so of course there is exciting news today, which is that everyone's most infamous former president, President Jacob Zuma, has announced that he will not be appearing before the State Capture Commission. Now, you may remember from when we discussed this last week that the Constitutional Court ordered him to do so. However, in a statement released today, Zuma said, basically, make me. He said, quote, "I am left with no other alternative but to be defiant against injustice, as I did against the apartheid government. I am again prepared to go to prison to defend the constitutional rights that I personally fought for and serve whatever sentence that this democratically elected government deems appropriate as part of the special and different laws for Zuma agenda." Which is quite a statement, and pretty, he's rolling for high stakes, I think, at this point. So he basically said, "Come and arrest me if you want to take me." He went on to say, "It's clear that the laws of this country are politicized even at the highest court in the land. Recently, at the State capture allegations. He said that allegations made against the judiciary had been overlooked. His son, in an interview this morning, Zuma Jr., one of his sons, said that he was being singled out and that Pravin Gordhan had not gone to jail for this. So the government should try and see what happens. Anyway, Terence, we talked about how Zuma was out of legal options. It seems this suggests that he would agree that he's out of legal options.
Well, I think we're kind of into the half-life now. But did anyone really ever expect him to go to prison? I think he's perhaps banking on the fact that he has a certain level of immunity, if you'll forgive the use of the word, given the particular historical context we're living in. But yeah, this was, in a way, I can understand his sense of pique. The whole purpose of cadre deployment was to bend the state to the party's will. And here you've got uppity judges saying things like, that you must go and speak about things that you may have done. That's really not on. I also think that there's an interesting connection between something that happened towards the beginning of his second term and what we're seeing now. He's saying that he is going to defy a ruling of the Constitutional Court. But remember that when Sudanese President al-Bashir visited South Africa, there was a court ruling on that. And I believe it was Gwede Mantashe, who I think at the time was the ANC Secretary General, saying that, well, from time to time, we will disregard these orders. Well, that's once you start to go down that rabbit hole, it's not easy to pull. It becomes very easy to replicate it, and not so easy to pull back. Look, I think that Zuma has sufficient popularity and standing within the ANC that effectively he probably remains untouchable. And I think that, whatever happens, there will be a Stalingrad strategy. He doesn't seem to want for funding to bankroll this sort of thing. He's quite elderly. So I don't see that going. The notion that Zuma will wear an orange jumpsuit, that I think is a fantasy, not going to happen.
Right. I mean, if we think about where we are, he's not even going to court, really. He's going before a commission. So, perhaps the commission will, in 3 or 4 or 5 or a year's time, say, okay, no, you should charge him. And then he'll have to be arrested again, and you'll have to go through the whole process. So, Zuma is playing for time at every single opportunity. But I agree with your point about how when you kind of damage institutions, in like we did with the president of Sudan, and when you start just ignoring rules whenever you want, it really does create a snowball. People, in terms of logic, a slippery slope is a fallacy. But in politics, in the world of politics, it really isn't, because once institutional decay sets in one place, it's like a cancer. It spreads to everywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Marius, I remember when I first joined the Institute, Gabriel and I joked about how the Zuma's political career ends with a siege of Nkandla, with the sort of Zulu loyalist impi defending Nkandla from SAPs, while helicopters fly overhead and the BBC is sort of reporting on it. Do you think that that's possible? Do you think that SAPs will come for him? I mean, we've seen arrest reports issued for someone like Asa Makashule before, and he still remains unarrested.
Look, I mean, you'd like to think that they will, but I think Terence is right. I just think Zuma's popularity within the ANC and his standing as a former president is probably going to be enough to protect him from going to jail. But just some of the stuff that's been coming out the State Capture Commission and what Zuma's been accused of. I mean, it's really Banana Republic stuff. Claims that he was getting 4.5 million rand a month from the South African Secret Service. Yes, state security agency, sorry. And that he was apparently looking into establishing a private militia. So, I mean, maybe the, like a SAPS or SANDF's siege of Nkandla with this kind of Zuma-aligned militia is not beyond the realms of possibility. But it's really we can all see the damage Zuma did to South Africa was really immense. But as I've said, this is also a point about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe never had a Mugabe problem. It's got a ZANU-PF problem. And that's the same with South Africa. We don't have a Zuma problem. We've got an ANC problem. And until the ANC gets voted out of power or reforms itself, which is probably less likely than getting voted out of power, we're going to have the same problems we saw that started. And we can draw a lot of these problems right back to under Nelson Mandela. I mean, I don't think Nelson Mandela himself was corrupt, but a lot of the the rot set in with the arms deal and that kind of thing, and cadre deployment, which is and cadre deployment 1997. That's when the ANC began with cadre deployment. That's where I think nearly every, not every problem, but I mean a large proportion of our problems of governance in South Africa can be drawn back to the issue of cadre deployment.
Yeah, I remember a story that I can't remember who wrote it, but the journalist who reported it said that he had no way of confirming the story, but this is a story he was told. And this was about remember Zuma was basically thrown out of the presidency, and there was this whole vote of no confidence that was going to be used to remove him because he refused to abide by the recall that the ANC issued. And then a story came out just after Zuma lost power there and Cyril became president, where they said that he had met with senior leaders of the South African National Defence Force and had plotted basically a coup where he would use a sort of militia and he was
going to announce a state of emergency apparently, and suspend parliament, etc.
Yeah, and prevent the vote of no confidence in him and essentially seize power. Now that story was, like I said, it was kind of almost ignored. I don't think anyone could confirm it. But when you see what was going on at the State Security Agency, it really kind of starts to look like, maybe that story wasn't so far-fetched. Maybe it was true. Terence, your final thoughts on this topic?
Strange things happen in this country. I think that not only those sort of rumors, but also there was a document put out by apparently senior members of the ANC who were involved in intelligence and the military, which wanted to bring in some sort of harakat governance and do all sorts of things like reintroduce race classification or whatever. There's definitely an authoritarian, a very strong authoritarian strain. I think perhaps the interesting thing is, can South African society actually be controlled like that? I think it would sort of fall apart in its own implausibility. It doesn't mean
last time, did it?
Yeah, look, I mean, it doesn't mean it wouldn't be damaging and leave the country with problems that will take decades to work out. But we are not. I don't think that South Africa can be escalated into any sort of North Korea. The scale of civic organization and the general disorderliness of society just defeats that. And I think we've seen that with the lockdown. These guys go and stand on beaches. I mean, they're bikers. Townships full of people who do not have the luxury of savings or whatever, just lifted the lockdown for themselves.
Yeah, remember when government tried to force the taxi industry to come to the party in the lockdowns, and the taxi industry just told them no, and that was it. I mean, can you imagine an authoritarian government running afoul of the taxi industry? It wouldn't last very long.
Yeah. So, as I say, North Korea is not our future, but some sort of just breakdown could be.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And anyway, this is once again another. It's a little bit of a crisis. Will Zuma be arrested? Because he should be, and we can only hope that he is, because otherwise the implications are going to be very, very severe. And I don't know if we'll see anyone arrested in the future. Anyway, let us quickly move to our last story for today. And speaking of coups and seizing power, the country of Myanmar, also known as Burma, which a couple of years ago, I think it was less than 10 years ago, had a sort of a revolution of a kind, but a fairly contained one where the democratic forces there, a political party, a civilian government called the National League for Democracy, managed to take power in a sort of in a power sharing agreement with the military, which had been ruling the country for decades. Unfortunately, this morning it appears that Myanmar's military has enacted a coup, and they captured the democratically elected leader of the government, a woman called Aung San Suu Kyi, who actually has won a Nobel Peace Prize, although a lot of people were very critical of that decision when later she was either complicit in or did nothing to stop the Rohingya genocide in Western Myanmar. So the military said that it was carrying out this this coup and placing senior leaders of the National League for Democracy political party in custody because there had been, quote, election fraud. And they have now handed over control to the chief of the military and declared a state of emergency for 1 year. There was a Facebook page for the former president's party, or the current president's party, I suppose, published comments saying that the people must protest against the military takeover. So we're not really sure where this is going to go yet. And this follows an election that was on November 8th, which saw a very strong performance for the sort of anti-military party, the pro-democracy party there. So I'll go to you, Terence. Myanmar is a really kind of backwards country. It hasn't had a lot of luck in the past couple of years. I think they only basically got the internet in that country in 2013. Give you an idea of how bad things are. There are countries in that have been torn by civil war in Africa that are in a better state than Myanmar. This is what's your thoughts on this? I mean, this is an ally of China, and it looks like it's going backwards.
Well, look, Myanmar or Burma, to those whose knowledge of it probably stems from knowing that there was a campaign in the Second World War there. It interestingly, in the past, it tried to cut itself off from and manage itself as a hermit state. Not that dissimilar from North Korea. In fact, probably slightly more in that direction. North Korea does have sort of view of itself as a world leader. With it's got all the ideological goods and whatever. Maybe delusional, but there it is. Coups are not as respectable as they used to be, but does anyone pay much attention? I think that Aung San Suu Kyi had a sort of Mandela-esque aura about her, but she never really unseated the military. She was a state councillor. Not, it was kind of like an ersatz position. She wasn't able to be the president because the military wouldn't allow it. Also, bear in mind, while her party won this landslide, the military gets to appoint like a quarter of their parliament.
Right.
So it's kind of like they've got a big middle finger with a big bayonet attached to it, pointing at their opponents.
And any constitutional amendment needs the 75% of parliament, or more than 75%. So the military's basically got an inbuilt veto as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So no, look, it's a sad situation. One of those sort of anomalies of the present. It's a society, I think, that's very difficult for outsiders to be able to understand. And I think, also an illustration of just how far and rapidly, someone of great stature can fall. I think Christopher Hitchens said something about, there's no guarantee that when an icon falls, it will not be from a very great height. Ms. Suu Kyi's attitude, if I can put it that way, during the campaign against the Rohingya left a great deal to be desired. And that fearless mother of the nation, tireless fighter for human rights and democracy. Well, that fell apart very quickly.
Right.
And for that reason, I'm not sure that you're going to find the kind of interest that you might have found for this 10 years ago.
Right.
Well, I think a Batman quote is apt here. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. And I think that's definitely seen with Aung Suu Kyi. I mean, yeah, as you said, perhaps she wasn't complicit in the Rohingya genocide, but she definitely didn't do anything to stop it.
Indeed. Anyway, very sad. It's always sad when you see any kind of democratic progress reversed. And of course, we can only hope that something happens to break the military's control of that country, because it is a very ugly thing. And Terence and I did some research actually on Myanmar last year. And the military regime there is, shall we say, not very pleasant. They are very one of the nastiest governments in the world, I think. So hopefully that comes to a peaceful resolution and a resolution that enhances human liberty. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We will be back tomorrow, of course, with the Tuesday edition of the Daily Friend. Watchers and listeners may be interested to know that I now finally have a tripod for my phone, so it's not going to fall off in the middle of recordings, hopefully, anymore. So
it's worse than I thought.
But every day we steadily improve. One day we will be as slick as a television show. Not quite yet, though. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, and have a wonderful week, everyone.